Hi there, this is Ross Ballon from Ballon Law. Today I have sat down with Stefano Covalan from a company called Corporatio. They are a Singapore-based company that incorporate companies around the world, and they work really closely with us at Ballon Law to help set various companies up around the world for our clients. And we sat down together and we went over the whole world to discuss here in December 2023 where the best places to incorporate a company. So hope you enjoy this video. Well, okay, Stefano. So thanks for having me today on trying to work out where the best place to put an offshore company is.
But, my pleasure.
You and I have done quite a bit of work together. I love your company. I love the dynamism, the ideas that you've come up with on how to make the offshore industry much better and more efficient. And of course, you also have your crypto angle, don't you? But yeah, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us about Corporatio?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm Stefano. I'm the founder of Corporatio. We're a licensed filing agent. We operate in a fair amount of jurisdiction at this point in Singapore, Seychelles, BVI, Panama, St. Vincent the Grenadines, Belize, and Wyoming in the US. We're trying to take care of like the 360 of the boringness of taking care of a company. So from the company incorporation to the accounting, the tax submissions, the visas application, the legal opinions, like you name it. Basically, when the founder, the business owner knows or needs something, we're trying to be there and help out in the process. Out of a little bit of luck, we ended up specializing a lot in Web3 customers. And so we do a lot of work on basically helping people to set up companies or finding those jurisdictions where they can operate without the need of a license, or where it's a little bit easy for them to operate with less requirements, no auditing maybe, or they can launch a token sales in a proper way. Kind of like all of that stuff. So I would say that 80% of our work at this point is about Web3 customers, and the remaining 20 is dividing on basically any type of industry.
Cool. Okay, so oh yeah, what about your smart companies, isn't it?
Yeah,
you've got to talk about that. Come on, this is
that's fair. So we're basically like the first company that managed to put the shares of a private limited entity on the blockchain, and we developed smart contracts to manage the corporate governance part of the company. So from transfer of shares to board resolutions to shareholders votings and so on. Every company that we create basically comes with that dashboard. Some clients get a little bit intimidated about that, so if they prefer to go in a normal and traditional way, they can still do that. But yeah, it's basically like a set of like 64 different smart contracts that helps managing the corporate governance, so that you're not obliged of relying or waiting every single time to your point of contact, your agent, your service provider to do something. You can just like, open the windows on your browser and do everything in your own way. To give you an idea, if I'm considering like a shares of transfer, traditionally in a place like Seychelles, for example, it would take you between 3 to 7 days to complete the entire process, back and forth with the agent, signing forms, all of that stuff. With our smart company dashboard, you basically complete the process in 15 seconds. So it does help when you use that, but if you don't want, we still do that in a traditional way.
Yeah, I haven't done one with you, have I? I've been trying to convince a couple of clients. I had one that was very close, but then they ran out of money. So
it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. So right in the middle of crypto winter, they ran out of money. So but what I loved, we came across each other when I was in Singapore, didn't we? And I just loved that finally somebody's done some proper innovation in our industry. And I've always thought you were a little bit of an sort of industry outsider at first, weren't you?
Yes.
More, which is exactly what I've kind of been saying for a while, right? Is if people in the industry don't innovate, smart people like you from outside are going to come in and go, "Hey, I can do this better." So
I don't know, but
what kind of brought you to the industry, and then did you see that there was room for somebody smart like you to come in? Just that'd be great to share, I think, to the audience.
I'm not sure about the smart part, but to me, actually, what made me start in the company was the fact that I was extremely pissed about the state of mind of things. So what happened is that I was the shareholder of a Singaporean company, and because obviously, like, I'm kind of like the most organized in among like all the shareholders that there were, I was the one that was appointed to deal with the filing agent in Singapore. And there was this specific moment where we had to file the AGM, the annual general meeting, and Singapore does have a law for electronic signatures. That law has been like passed in 2014 already. But the filing agent was refusing to use that. And so we ended up literally having to take our AGM file and ship that across like UK, India, US, back to Singapore, all of that stuff. And when I mentioned that to the agent was like, yeah, like the registers say that there is a law, but in reality, they don't really accept that. Which was a lie, by the way. It wasn't true at all. Like you can totally like file a digital version of your AGM to the register website fully online. Like there is no need whatsoever for anything physical. And you know how it is, the classic saying, like if you believe that you can do better, then prove it. And that's literally what I did. I was like, this is BS to me. Like there is no way on earth that someone should actually have to go through something like that. And that's why I decided to start the company.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it's really annoying, isn't it, when people sort of set up their own mini rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, outside the legal rules. So yeah, I mean, but this is exactly what our industry needs to be careful of, right? If we don't start doing things a lot better, then people like you are going to come around and find a way to do it. Cool. Well, you and I can talk for hours and hours about which we have done almost on offshore company jurisdictions. So that's why I thought it'd be great to get you on today to help me talk about this, because I know you've got some really unique insights and experience in key jurisdictions, and as have I. I think it'd be great to share that with the audience. So I will put like a slide up on the screen of all the jurisdictions we're going to talk about, and I kind of lump them in. I kind of, in my own mind, I've lumped all the jurisdictions into different areas. So should we start with let's start with the Caribbean. Come on, yeah, I've just come back from the Bahamas, so let's start with the Caribbean. Why don't we start with St Vincent, because you and I have done some work on that recently, and not a lot of people have heard about St Vincent, probably, actually. But it is a very useful jurisdiction, and it's had a lot of changes last year, didn't it? In 21, actually, was it 20? Yeah, 21. I think they did the changes. Where before it used to actually be a sort of forex, warehousing type place. A lot of the big banks in London, New York would stick all their operations in a St Vincent company. So actually, a lot of people in that investment world are quite familiar with St Vincent, but maybe not private wealth. But yeah, what's your views on St Vincent?
I think that on that one we're kind of like on the opposite side, because it's one of my least favorite, to be honest. Mostly because my work is traditionally like on, obviously setting up the companies, doing the paperwork and all of that stuff. And it's really not an organized place. Like, unfortunately, everything that should be done in a matter of minutes takes weeks. And you write a message and the register answer you like after 2 weeks, because for whatever reason they don't feel like working that day, and so on. It's a very, very messy jurisdiction. However, for a lot of people, it's very popular for Europeans. I noticed, like, Europe has something that they like it quite a bit, because it's not blacklisted. It's not like one of the sanctioned countries. And because of probably like of the proximity and so on, is obviously like under territorial of UK. So kind of like there is the connection between the two. And it's very true. It used to be like super popular for exchanges because they didn't have the license requirements. So everybody that wanted to do like an exchange of any sort was just like creating a company there, because, hey, no license. So you just like open up in a week, you're up and running, basically. Now that has changed a lot. Like now you basically have like this rule that you still don't need the license. So they didn't introduce the licensing requirement, but when you create an exchange company, you have 12 months to gather a license in another country. And then you need to present the license number, and the registrar is going to approve you to continue operating. To me, that kind of like defeat the purpose to creating a company there at this point, because if you need to gather a license in another country, you will need to create a company in another country to gather the license. And so at that point, if you already have that company, that license that is fully in operation and so on, why would you create a detached company or a subsidiary just for doing the same thing? Maybe for customer support, something like that. But at that point, I would maybe consider something else. So that's one of the big changes that they've done. The other messy one was the big change between the IBC and the LLC approach. So they used to have like the IBC, and the IBC was the international business company that works pretty much in the same way of any other country. Now they basically open up everything. So both directors and shareholders are public, and you do also have taxes to pay on that. So everybody moved into the LLC model, where the LLC is basically the new IBC, where you still have the private information, you still have no taxes and so on. So just keep in mind, if you're thinking about creating a company, go for the LLC most likely rather than the IBC. It's remains still popular also for crypto because they don't have virtual asset service providers in place. So you do have the limitation for the crypto side in terms of exchanges. So same rules in that sense, but you can basically like still do an ICO or creating a token or a DAO, these type of things. So again, not my favorite, to be honest. I know that we have done work on St. Vincent. You do have like a little bit of a love there. But for me,
I think for corporate stuff though, not for private wealth. I agree with you. I think and from what I could tell from the legislation, they are not trying to attract private wealth. Actually, they're trying to attract the exchanges, and they think that's big business for them. But I think to your point, it's probably too small, isn't it? And there's not enough competition between service providers in order to have good standards. Yeah.
So to give you an idea in terms of like numbers, BVI, which is basically like the king of the offshore, does 1,600 companies a month. St. Vincent does 300.
Yeah,
it's very tiny. Like
yeah.
It's under the radar.
We were laughing before, weren't we? They're always at that Euro house, aren't they, in Richmond Hill?
Always. It's always in the Euro house.
Yeah.
Always.
Okay, so that's something. So literally, I wouldn't use it for private wealth, but probably okay for certain crypto or corporate stuff. Pretty hard, probably around the substance rules there to put that in. I would have thought. But yeah, should we anything else on St. Vincent, or should we move on to the BVI?
I would say one thing on St. Vincent, to me at least, now that, and obviously that tag on the BVI, now the BVI is blacklisted for the European Union. For Europeans, St. Vincent is very good because the bank structure still allowed to open banks for LLCs that are in St. Vincent. Not Wise, unfortunately, like which was the king of the EMI solution, obviously. But that's probably the only still structure that I would consider. If you're a European, you open a company there, it's under the radar, it's not blacklisted. Banks in Europe, and so I'm thinking about like all the EMI in Estonia and Lithuania are still okay with those type of entities, while they obviously see BVI, Panama, and all the classic in a completely different light. So that's the use case that I can still see, to be honest.
Yeah, and then with the blacklists, and the grey list now, isn't it? So you've got, what is it, Annex 2 and Annex 1 of the EU non-cooperative jurisdiction lists. That's sort of all powerful, isn't it? What I find the whole thing very strange, because Nevis, for example, from what I can tell, hasn't got any economic substance rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not on the black nor grey list.
Yep.
Right? So go figure. Yeah, somewhere like the Bahamas, which is very well regulated, got a ton of laws, they cannot get off the blacklist. And I can't help but think there's some sort of geopolitics going on there. But what's your sort of view on that?
I agree. I do very, very much agree. Because like you obviously mentioned like two very good examples, but I would take BVI as the other perfect example. That I strongly think that the reason why they ended up in blacklisted is because of the Brexit from UK. Because BVI was recognized as territorial, so BVI's citizens were recognized as like European citizens for a period. Because of Brexit and everything, it kind of like, oh, you're in blacklist now. So yeah, I do strongly believe that it's more geopolitical than actual like, oh, here's your set of rules and that's about it. Because I would even take like Panama as another example. Panama was removed from the gray list from the North American side, so now it's in white list, totally fine, but still remains fully black for the European side. So we're clearly having like, wait a second, isn't like the same rules here that should apply, but somehow one is fine and the other one is not even close to being fine. Like, so yeah, it's more of like a gameplay that actually like, here's your rules.
It's a big gameplay, isn't it? But it's important, isn't it? Because as you said before, the banks just, they're black and white on, if you're blacklisted, we don't open an account. I even saw accounts getting closed.
Yeah.
When the BVI first got blacklisted, I think the BVI got moved onto the grey list now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's because they've done the fulfillment of like, so with this year in 2023 they changed the rules. Directors are now public. They used to be private. They have accounting rules in place, so now you need to file like your financials and so on. Which, by the way, they're still hilarious to me because you just need to file the financials, so no supporting documents and no transaction history. So you could file up like a P&L, like a profit and loss with whatever you want, and still that acceptable. So again, not really sure how that is supposed to work. But yeah, because they set all of these like rules and they're showing that they're obviously like willing to collaborate, they're kind of making the steps to going back into the white list, basically. I doubt that BVI will remain in sanction for a long time. It's it's literally one of the most famous jurisdiction in the world for the offshore. So I can't imagine a scenario in which like they're going to be punished for a long time.
Yeah, I got told the story that the reason that they're so big was that some guy that was working in the BVI on the 8th of August 1988, so you'd have 8888, which is lucky number in Chinese.
Yeah,
just incorporated like 500 companies on that day, went to Hong Kong and was like flogging them, and all the Chinese were like, well, we want one of those companies. And so he had like about 500 companies get set up in Hong Kong overnight, and they kind of took off from there.
It's not insane, actually, as obviously of the story itself, because it is one of the few jurisdictions that allows you to have known Latin characters. So if you are Chinese, for example, you can create a company that has the Chinese name in it, and you don't need to translate that. You can actually use that in the original language. It does make sense as a story, to be honest. It's totally possible.
Yeah. So I mean, my view on the BVI is, obviously it was the sort of premier company jurisdiction, maybe not like trust law, but certainly company, and mainly because it was just so easy, wasn't it? It was just the price was right, and you just didn't need to do anything basically. I think the filing of the accounts is a big game changer, because a lot of people just don't do account, or don't need to sometimes, right? If it's it's just holding an asset. So I think that is quite a challenge. But maybe that's the way the whole world's going, and you just got to get used to that. You've got to do accounts. What was interesting news recently, wasn't it? It was that the BVI have said that they are not going to put in place the beneficial ownership register now, following the EU loss to the EU court, saying that basically that was against data protection legislation. So particularly the UK government losing that battle. So my view on the BVI, I think it's still, if you just need a straightforward company, it's fine. That as you said before as well, the service providers there are very well drilled.
Yeah,
they in fact some of them are actually excellent, actually, so that they know that they've got high service standards. I think, as you say, they know that people need certificate incumbencies in 24 hours and things like that. But yeah, it's probably like one just to watch a bit, isn't it? Because it's kind of a little bit, as you said, with Brexit, with being on the grey list, it's kind of, there's a bit of a focus on it and changes, which make it a little bit uncertain, which is what people don't like. What's your view?
It's I think is perfectly nailed, because it's one of the situations where apart from like the change that they've done now, the beneficial owner, for example, you're mentioning the change in the structure, but the register now is aware, actually, from the BVI point of view, of who are the BOs, which is another little comma that wasn't there before. Before it was just the agent that was owning that information. The accounting part, I think, is like we're seeing the trend. Like the BVI has done it this year, but like Seychelles and Panama has introduced that like a few years back already. Belize has announced that they're going to introduce that now. So all the offshore is going in the direction. I think that at least from that part, they took a very relaxed approach, because again, like it's only P&L and balance sheet. But for example, if you're taking a country like Seychelles, you need to report those books twice a year, and you need to provide supporting documents and transaction histories as well. So the amount of work is obviously much, much heavier. But I do agree that I would pay attention to that a little bit, because take even the crypto side, the Web3, they introduced the best rules. Till last year, you were just creating a company and you were free of operating with no problems. Now you want to do an ICO, you want to do an IDO, you need a license. The license costs you like $30,000 plus the legal fees and everything. You're easily going in like 50,000. And here's the tough part, is that people think that, oh, but if I incorporate before the changes, then there is no problem. That's not how they're interpreting or how they're pushing these new rules. If you are, for example, a Web3 companies, you had till end of July of 2023 to comply. If you didn't get a license by that time, your company gets closed. So if they change the rules that the directors are public, it's not that because your company was incorporated before that you remain private. You will be public from that moment ongoing. Because they're in that process of like, it's not over. They're not fully out. They're still in the process where they're still like complying with the rules and the requirements. I do expect that there are going to be more rules coming in place. How heavy they're going to be, that's a completely different story. But yes, I would say that I really agree with you. If it's something that maybe if I'm aside of the Europe or the UK in a geographical point of view, I would say, yeah, it's a very, very good jurisdiction. One director, one shareholders, you want to remain private, you put the nominee director, fairly easy, couple of days, incorporation done. Super straightforward. Agents are super top notch. They're really, really good in that sense. It works extremely well. Holding companies, personal wealth, startups, tech companies, investment firms, like you name it. It remains a very good jurisdiction for a lot of use cases, to be honest.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I guess to check that you can open a bank account first, isn't it, before you go ahead? That would probably be just the only thing, wouldn't it? So perhaps before we move on to the big players in the Caribbean, just what is your view on Nevis? This sort of weird, no substance but not blacklisted. Or do you ever use Nevis or see it or?
No, so we don't have a lot of requests. Like we normally have like a couple every year. We also like don't operate too much there in general, so it's not like one of the focus. But I would say that to me, Nevis is a more interesting play for the passport side, that second citizenship type of approach and so on, rather than the company itself. Because again, with the fact that you have no economical substance rules, I doubt that a lot of banks are gonna like touch you in that sense. You will need to like pass a fair amount of like due diligence and everything. It is true, however, that you're not blacklisted. So, nobody can tell you anything in that point. You're part of Schengen, you're part of like, in terms of like a geopolitical point of view, it's a good jurisdiction. I still think that it has that focus on Europe itself. Like they really play that to be a tag for either the North America or the Europe play. Because of the passport, because of like all the relationship that they've done. Like the government has done very, very good on playing with every single powerful country in general, like making sure that they have a good relationship in that sense. So if you're thinking on the long term on, potentially putting on that, I think like the new rules are like 250,000 as a contribution for the passport. And the real estate should be like $500,000 if I'm not mistaken. So if you're thinking about, for example, we're entering in a bull market, you set a company there and you're doing some advisory, you have some tokens that are like parked there. They do like the classic 1000x or whatever it is. Now all of a sudden you're a millionaire. You score a passport on the bull run, not a bad play. I would actually consider that for some of those use cases, to be honest.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a few powerful people who've got passports there, basically, right? And that's why the OECD seems to leave them alone. Yeah, I know one billionaire. Is he a billionaire? Probably. Who's like got a passport there, but bought like a house and land because he thinks the whole world's about to go on fire. So he's like, we can go there, we can grow our own food, and we don't need anybody. So maybe there's a few, like, I don't know, what's that phrase, sort of rich doomsday people.
Yeah.
Who are parking themselves there, and maybe that's got some political leverage. Okay, well, why don't we talk about Cayman and Bahamas now? We can sort of perhaps talk about them together as the sort of two big jurisdictions. Obviously, Cayman is well known for its funds. I think Cayman is, when you look on the list of the biggest countries who invest into America, you would have thought it would be China or something, but actually it's Cayman Islands, isn't it? Is the biggest investor in America because of everybody using the fund structuring. Does have a quite proud trust law as well, but maybe you might say Bahamas is a bit more of a traditional trust jurisdiction. That's in my mind. That's how I'd see it. Is Bahamas has a very, very old trust. You see some very old trust there from the sort of 1930s and 1920s still set up there, where you think of Cayman as funds. But yeah, what's your view? What do you see?
Personally, on trust, you know that I'm a big fan of the private foundation model in Panama. So to me, like tweaking that into a more of a trust structure is probably unbeatable because of the law in Panama. But if I'm picking the two, I think that like Cayman has a very, very good regulation in place for that. Like it's very famous for DAOs, for example, because you kind of like can completely detach that BO's approach, the protector, the ultimate beneficial owner, and so on. You can really, really completely like detach that, which is the reason why it works so well for places like, the US and so on, because now you don't have the double taxation or the economical substance that you're running the show from country X, even if your company is in country Epsilon. Because you're not actually doing that, and the agents there are the one that are like managing the structure for you. It's kind of perfect. We're seeing the limitation on other structures, like for example in Panama, from that sense, where eventually when foundations and like so DAOs and companies like grow to a specific size, they need to start appointing third people to basically be the managers of those operations. In Cayman, that comes in place basically as a full package, and the regulation is done in a way where even the papers and the documents from the governments are very clear on that. No, there is no BOs in that sense. It's a good one. It's a good regulation. It's a good law system. The brand is obviously like super strong. It costs a fortune, however, like compared to the other offshore, is extremely expensive. But you're obviously paying for something that makes a lot of sense. There is a reason if it's so famous, and the price is at that point because they know that people still want that. It's not a structure for the startup. As we're talking about trust and so on, we're not talking about the people that are there and have like a couple of thousands of dollars in budget. You want to go to Cayman, you're looking at anything, in my opinion, from $500,000 and above. Less than that is not the jurisdiction for you. It has, however, the fact that, and that's what we were discussing in private before, that the reputation on the service agents is not good. The general like opinion, it's that it's very messy as a jurisdiction, not as probably like my experience with St. Vincent, unfortunately, but I never got the feedback that is like on par with like BVI or Panama in terms of like the level and the quality of operation. So it's the classic things of like, if you have the capital, you probably, if you're playing at that level, you're probably going to deal with a law firm at that point, not with an agent. So the lawyer is the one that will actually have the headaches dealing with the agent. So you as a client are probably going to be fine. But just like something to keep in mind. Bahamas to me plays a very different game, because it's true that they have that history, but lately I've seen them going like very strong on the crypto side, for example, the fresh part of the fintech approach of the industry. So it's almost like they know that somehow they lost against the Cayman part in terms of brand and so on, even if they're super close to the US and so on. So it's another very famous place. But what Bahamas says to me that none of the other offshore has is that if you're doing like a Web3 project, getting banking for those projects is actually fairly easy. The connection and the relationship between the government, the service provider, and the banks, because they have the local banks. They don't have banks that like are outside. You take some Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, they probably have one bank that is registered there. You can't obviously like expect a big plateau of options and so on. Bahamas does have a lot of banks, and they're totally willing to operate with IBCs that are located in the country. That to me is a plus, that if I'm thinking more into startups, if I'm thinking more into like companies that wants to like test out things, and they're maybe into like services that are traditionally a little bit more high risk, that to me is a perfect place to run a company.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. Yes, the Bahamas has over 200 banks, which is
That's
a lot,
crazy.
right? So, yeah, I think my experience with the two jurisdictions, as you say, with Cayman Islands, they almost don't want to do administration there. As you said, they've imported very, very high quality UK common law jurisdiction lawyers. They want to just do the high level work. In fact, sometimes they don't even want to run the funds. They just want to be on the governance committee, and they'll charge 50, 100,000 to be high level governance on these big funds, and they do that very well. And so they might just have a very small team of top lawyers who are making really good money doing that. But then, as you said, on the actual admin, they're not so good. I think the Bahamas is quite good for administration. My experience is there. They're very good. In fact, I do know a few Bahamas companies. As you correctly said, I think Bahamas have given up trying to compete on the fund side with Cayman, both from a legal and a sort of branding perspective. But what a few of them have said is, well, the Cayman could outsource the fund admin to us in the Bahamas.
That's true.
Right? I know a few people are pitching that, even though I think some of the Cayman guys actually outsource stuff to Mauritius and things like that. But the other problem with the Cayman Islands, my experience, is that the registry is quite well organized, but in a bad way for clients, because you have to put your credit card in to do anything, and everything is recorded. Everybody that is a party to any entity has to have a registration at the registry. So anything that's not filed, if it's a day late or whatever, they know, and it's automatically ticking it up. And when you go to do something, they'll be like, oh, you haven't done this filing, or you haven't done this. You need to do it now. You have to go in, put your credit card in, and you can't do anything until anything's cleared. And we're obviously, with all other jurisdictions, maybe you haven't paid an invoice, or you haven't filed something, and it kind of just gets dealt with. Maybe there's a small fee for processing that late thing. But with the Cayman, and as you said, the fees are already high. And I did see in one case where one service provider, they had, not even, I think it was maybe 20 companies that they had missed filings on, and they ended up costing them about between 15 to 20 grand to resolve that. So my advice to people is, basically, unless you're uber organized or got really deep pockets, you're some huge fund, stay away from Cayman. And I do like the Bahamas. I think it was a bit unfortunate with FTX, obviously, because they'd gone gung-ho on being crypto. And I think that was a real bit of a shame for them, actually, that happened, because they were trying to build their industry on that. But they have the DARE Act. They have the SAN coin as well. They do have their own central bank coin, which is perfect, because you have all these people that live on these remote islands and there's no ATMs, but they can use the SAN coin to transact. So it's quite a dynamic jurisdiction, and I think it's fine for setting up companies and setting up trusts, particular asset protection trusts as well, which I'll do a video on one day. it's a good place. So any other comments on Cayman or Bahamas, or we'll move on?
No, I think that like one actually that is a good like point is that with the FTX situation, I would imagine that because of the gravity and the magnitude of the fact, I do expect something to change, or like in the same way that we're seeing, like for example, with BVI and the new rules because of the blacklisted and so on. I think that the pressure that will be a point because of the situation with FTX, things might change over there. I don't know if it's like, I would still recommend that at the moment because like they are a little bit more of the weight, like they do have a little bit of muscles compared to like other offshores, but yeah, considering the gravity of the fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they start like implementing some very aggressive rules.
Yeah, from what I hear on the ground, that they're very risk averse right now. They don't want anything else to happen. And yeah, as you said, actually, it's a highly geopolitical area, isn't it? You have a lot of Chinese money in there that's built things like the Bahamas, and I think the only, it's something to do with submarines. Like, so the only sonar testing ground or something like that is in the Bahamas, and basically the Americans have it, but the Chinese want it. And so there's all these like really high level geopolitics goes on, I think, with the Bahamas, which the Bahamas is basically all about its location. It's just in an unbelievable location. So yeah, very I tell you who it's very good for is the Canadians.
Yeah, that's fair. But sorry, I want to know more about the submarine. Actually, I'm super curious. What is this about? Like, that's super cool.
Yeah, I should find out more about this. There's something to do with sonar and submarines that there's very few places in the world they can test them or use them, and Bahamas is one.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know anything about this, to be honest.
Well, I think this pulls back the dark arts of the geopolitics, doesn't it? That just nothing's quite what it seems. Is it somebody gets whacked over the head, but there's like another dark reason in the background. So I was told that the Chinese are basically trying to, hey, we'll build you this hotel. Can we have the sonar base?
Fair enough. Classic move. That's true.
Yeah, and so because America is building a new embassy there, which is absolutely enormous.
And it's like on the on the sonar area, probably.
Apparently it's very deep. It's so deep that it's hit the some of the old pirate tunnels.
Damn.
So yeah, so because Nassau doesn't really get hit by hurricanes, it's something the pirates knew this, right? So that's very true. It's just given because it's kind of sheltered by some of the other islands, yeah, there's these deep tunnels there where the pirates used to hide stuff, and yeah, the embassy's like gone that down. So I don't know what the Americans are putting there, but yeah.
That's super fascinating. Like, thank you for that. Like, always like to learn something new. That's amazing.
Yeah. So and yeah, the Bahamas just cannot seem to get off the blacklists, and I think that's geopolitics. I know that they were getting criticised for their substance efforts. I mean, actually, that is one thing, because they've been getting whacked over the head by the OECD for not having strong substance requirements, or being accused of that at least. They now have gone full on the substance, and I know that they have been the auditing companies saying, "Hey, you said this. We want to see evidence." And I've heard they've been putting fines out, including six-figure fines to companies. To companies that are sort of breaching the substance rules, where I've never heard really anybody enforcing these fairly new rules. So far, but it seems the Bahamas is hitting it hardest. But yeah, what have you seen?
I've seen like the on the Seychelles part, like in Seychelles, for example. So not in the Caribbean side, but when Seychelles went onto the blacklist in order to get out, they took that super seriously, and they were very strict with companies of like, look, either you fulfill the requirements when the deadlines arrive, you really had like a couple of weeks to sort it out, or they were really going to penalize and freeze the companies very aggressively. But in terms of like the economical amount, like you're mentioning, like the potentially 6 digits, no, I don't know any country that went to that extent, at least.
Yeah. Okay. This probably moves us on to Barbados and Bermuda, and then we can finish with the Caribbean. But the other reason the Bahamas used to suffer was because they did not have any tax agreements
That's
with
true.
any jurisdiction. In fact, they don't. But what they do have now is the tax information exchange agreements with most jurisdictions. Where Barbados, it had a runway that was capable of Concorde landing on. So the Concorde used to go to Barbados directly from London. But also they had tax agreements with many countries. So Barbados was always a very popular jurisdiction, perhaps for like headquartering companies. Back in the old days, you wouldn't be able to do that now, but in the old days, companies put their headquarters there. But I think I think Barbados is kind of, I don't see why anybody would probably use it now. I think perhaps it was old European money as well, a bit, maybe French and British stuff back in the day. I don't. I'm sort of agnostic of it as a jurisdiction. I don't see it very often now. But Bermuda, of course, is kind of not in the Caribbean. Almost, it's so sort of far out on its own, isn't it? And it seems to stay off the radar everywhere, mainly because I think because it's always been the insurance industry that was there, which is obviously seen as less nefarious than the trust and offshore company jurisdiction industry, which is perhaps not fair. So Bermuda seems to have a good reputation, probably safe with companies there. But yeah, what's your view on the sort of more Barbados and Bermuda nexus?
No, I agree. I think that like they did retain that the Bermuda side has retained like the offshore. It remains like super popular. Again, in North American clients are absolutely on board with that. They're very, very familiar with it. Barbados is one of the structures where, yes, it's true that they have like the tax approach and everything, but they're moving towards like more of an approach like almost of destroying that offshore industry and trying to like become more of a normal environment or normal like place, which is very similar a little bit to like what Belize has done in some sort of like, you know, start putting like some taxes, putting some rules in the accounting requirements and all of that stuff. I do agree with you that I can't think of a scenario in which like I would actually say, oh, that's a perfect place for this, because somehow it will come not even second, but potentially like third or fourth for compared to like a lot of the other places. It's not bad. Don't take me wrong. It's not like a bad jurisdiction or anything. It does have still the like compared to potentially like I'm thinking about countries that are a little bit more intense in terms of like filing requirements. I'm thinking about like Malta, for example, in Europe. It's one of those jurisdictions that it's not yet too heavy, but at the same time is doing that transition phase that it's not really as lean as it used to be in the past. So if you're going there, you do know that you're going to have a little bit of an headache, some few things here and there, because the requirements are just different, because they're doing a process that is different.
Yeah, I agree. And then Bermuda, I think we were talking about before, just on some recent practical experience, was more on the crypto side. It looked like that at the moment was probably the easiest place to put an exchange in terms of price, legal system, but also the speed at which they could get an exchange up and running, I think, in 3 months. So yeah, what's your view on Bermuda? Anything particular there?
No, that's very true. Again, if it depends on the type of exchange that we're talking about, I will be more precise on saying that like an exchange that deal with fiat, it's very, very good to be incorporated there. If the exchange is like a DAX or something that doesn't require a fiat, I would still prefer going with Panama, because I think like, you know, it's unbeatable, because in 7 to 10 days you're up and running. So you know, it's completely different bull game there. But if we're considering like the fiat approach, and again, that interaction with the bank, the fact that the banks are on board on the crypto side makes a massive difference. Anybody that has done a Web3 companies knows how difficult it is to get banking, knows how difficult it is to do on-off ramp, and knows how many questions you receive every single time, even if you have your invoice and stuff like that, even if you can document where the funds are coming from, banks always have the line of difficulties on your side. Bermuda remains in that sense where they're still relaxed. Again, I do believe personally that this is going to change due to the FTX situation. But as of now, as of today, I wouldn't think about like any other country. You could have a good approach on like or something in the same way. Like, for example, if you set up a crypto company in country A, another entity in country B, you do like a connection between the two stuff, like all of that stuff. But if you're thinking about just like one company, one place, everything in one shot, then yes, that works extremely well.
Yeah. We were talking about that before. Where sort of best practice with Web3 companies is equity in one company, tokens in another.
Yes, that's very true. Well, that's more of an asset protection side, less on the also for the banking, you're obliged of doing that.
Yeah,
very true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to Panama. Yay, Panama. So I mean, Panama was in the 60s, 70s. It was it was BVI took over, actually, wasn't it? Everybody had Panama companies and Panama foundations, of course, right? That the Panama Foundation was the offshore holding company, or not that it was a company, but holding entity of choice. And then it's kind of sort of reputation has sort of declined over the years, hasn't it? I don't know if fairly or unfairly, but it always had that more anti-money laundering feel about it, right? And so it's more an optic point of view, perhaps, with Panama. I've been there a couple of times. I think the service providers and the lawyers there are very, very high quality, and the service you get there, and I think the dedication to being compliant. And that, of course, we had the Panama Papers, was the first big data leak ever in our industry with Mossack and Fonseca, and that destroyed that very old business overnight. But they did have a few things that they probably shouldn't have had in there. But yeah, obviously, I think Panama on the crypto side is quite interesting as well, wasn't it? Because there was this sort of revolutionary law about to come out, but then the president wouldn't sign it off, and then I think the Supreme Court recently rejected it as well. So we like it, but we're not sure what's going to happen with that new law coming in. I'm not sure if I would. I'm not sure where I would use it. Maybe for certain crypto things, maybe not so much for private wealth, unless it was, of course, Latin American wealth, and I think some of the Latin American people are also okay with the banking system there, but what's your views on this? You love this jurisdiction.
I love Panama. You know that, like, everybody that knows me knows my position on Panama. Like, I think it's the best offshore place that there is on everywhere. Like, it's unbeatable on every level. It used to be, it's very true, the second country in the world for number of private incorporations after Hong Kong. With the Panama Papers, that's completely went away. That's very, very true. They are still, in terms of like numbers and everything, like as we were talking about, like the 1,600 in BVI. Panama at the moment does 1,400 companies a month, so it's not too far off from BVI, without considering the foundation side. But I mean, me personally, I'm like, that's the best of the best, mostly because the quality of the agents is unmatchable. They really go the extra mile on clarifying things, so making sure that things are done properly. They're also very honest, which is something that I appreciate a lot. I've always noticed that, like, when you get an agent in BVI, for example, that make a mistake, they tend to be a little bit like defensive on that, in the sense of like, oh, it's your responsibility. We don't pay for that. It's your problem. In Panama, they go the extra mile, and they're like, it's fine. It's our problem. We pay for it. You don't need to do anything. And I always appreciate that a lot, because there is that level of trust that is in place. As I was saying, like when we were talking about like the Cayman structure, the foundation to me are the strongest asset protection vehicle that you can get, because you get to that point where by law, if you have a private foundation, no judge can force the foundation to distribute assets, even if you are in fault, which is insane. It means that it's untouchable. Whatever you put there, it can't be taken out if you don't want to. And no jurisdiction has that level of protection in that sense. Yes, they did have to change things, like pretty much very similar to BVI and Seychelles and all the other countries. Directors are now public. You do have accounting requirements. They do have the BO's informations that are still owned by the government, by the register. So that level at least like remains, which all the other offshores has changed a lot. If we're going into Web3, I think that, again, is the perfect match for everything, because they have announced that they don't want to have the VASP, the virtual asset service provider, so no licenses whatsoever. They do have the proposal, the ones that you were talking about. That entire proposal is trying to basically create a knob where people not only set up IBCs to do Web3 projects, but it creates an environment that is so good, very similar to what El Salvador is doing. So an environment that is so good that you're almost tempted to move there and actually do something. It is true, however, that the president has blocked that because of money laundering problems. And like, how do you know where like the source of funds are coming in and all that stuff? So now I go back on the drawing board. Unfortunately, that is getting a massive step back now because of like last month there were the riots because of the mining contract and so on. So totally unrelated to the crypto stuff. But the Supreme Court obviously is now busy with that mining contract. The government and the people are busy with those things. The government is going to change in May. Whatever new governments will be elected will need to take care of the mining side of things. So if we're talking about crypto regulation for the next 2 to 3 years, I don't see anything new coming out, which is bad in the sense of like a progressive type of approach. But what there is now, it's already the best that there is in the industry, because you can do whatever you want. And as long as you remain in crypto, so as long as no fiat is allowed, you can basically create any type of crypto project without any need of special permission and special license. What I mean with that is that, take, for example, the Marshall Island. They launched their DAO LLC model. Tons of projects are like going there now and so on. If you're doing a crypto project that is relating to gambling, for example, you can't do that in Marshall, but you can do that in Panama. If you're doing a DAO, for example, from a structure in St. Vincent, is a company that owns the token, the agreement between the DAO and the company is based on the shareholders of the company. So the DAO in reality doesn't own anything. Like you can break that trust whenever you want, and legally you can do that as the owner of the company. You do a DAO through a foundation in Panama, now the beneficiaries and the token holders are actually making the calls and the decisions, and that's legally binding. You don't have the KYC requirements, which you do on the Marshall Islands, because like at 25% of the tokens, you need to do the registration. The DAO LLC in Wyoming, you need to file the list of members. Panama doesn't have that. Like, it's so versatile. It's so easy as a jurisdiction that really, like, you're doing a Web3 project, 99.99% of cases, Panama will be the best place for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm super, super in favor. I'm sorry, like, I'm not even trying to deny that. It to me is like the quality, the level, the people, like it's really, really the best of the offshore.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with the service providers. I found it better to work with a Panamanian law firm that had a BVI office and deal with the Panama office, and then you have the Panama service level. So, yeah, okay, well, interesting. Let's keep an eye on Panama then. It looks like it's coming up with some creative laws, and they've got the service there. So, I think that probably leaves the Caribbean main jurisdiction. Maybe just before we move on to perhaps going to European countries, any comments on America? I mean, America is. Oh, sorry. I knew there's one other thing to say about Panama. The Panama Canal.
Oh yeah, of course.
We've always got to bring geopolitics into this, haven't they? And you and I have had this discussion before.
Yes.
They have the canal there, and that gives them a lot of leverage to not get whacked over the head, doesn't it?
That is very true. They can't be bullied. It's the biggest asset of like any other country that there is in the offshore. We're seeing what happened like with Seychelles. We're seeing what is happening with BVI. We're seeing the trend. Panama, to give you an idea, like on the blacklist part from the US, they were receiving a fine of like $165,000 a day because they were blacklisted, they were not cooperating and so on. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article that came out that one ship, to get in front of the line in the canal, paid on top of all the fees to actually pass the canal as like a bonus thing to like a priority fee, $4 million. So like, and that was one ship in a day that paid that thing. And you're having a penalty of $165,000 a day because you're not complying. The scale of that asset of the canal, like for the country, is insane. Like the magnitude of people don't realize how massive of an asset it is. But every time that a country goes in trying to bully Panama, Panama can just say like, sorry, the Suez Canal is available for you. Have fun. It's
it's go around Argentina.
That or up north of North Canada and so on.
I mean that's what I was told when I was there. It was the option was either the boat pays 200 grand to go through the canal, or it costs them 2 million in fuel to go around Argentina. So but I guess that I was told that was a long time ago. I was that story. So I guess the prices have gone well up, haven't they? Since then. Yeah. So 4 million a boat now, is it?
So to jump the line. So to be on the first one.
Okay, right. Yes. Yeah, because there's probably a big queue there now, isn't it? I know they're trying to extend it, but but if you've got high oil prices and like see you later, I would go across the Pacific.
Sorry. One thing that came to mind actually on the enlarge of the canal. So the three companies that are like taking the enlarge of the canal, one is Panamanian, one is Italian, and one is like I think is either from Belgium or Netherlands. This is more, it's very, very specific for the Italians. But if you are an Italian holder of an Italian passport, you do qualify automatically for the Treaty of Friendship and Development, which basically allows you to create an IBC in Panama, have a personal bank account where you deposit $10,000 as a minimum deposit, and you qualify for PR, for permanent residency. This is only for Italians because it's a special treaty that there is. But if you're an Italian, basically with $25,000 in total, you can get a permanent resident to basically like valid for 5 years, and after those 5 years, you can apply for a passport. When we were talking, for example, about Nevis and so on, like the second citizenship model tradition is always like around the $500,000 mark. This is one of the cheapest approach. It's obviously only for Italians, so it's very niche in that sense. But you could potentially score a passport with a $25,000 investment. So it's just a bonus thing about the country.
No, I mean I do like Panama. I know we know it is blacklisted, but I mean the airport connections there are fantastic, and it is a stunning country, isn't it? And you can see where the money from that canal's gone, isn't it? I mean the infrastructure there is very good actually. So okay. Well, we could talk a lot about Panama all day. Let's move on though. Maybe just a few questions. We should talk about America quickly. Without my view, and I want to hear your view, without doubt, the easiest place on the planet to open a company is the US, isn't it? I did a Delaware company a few months back, and I could even pick the date when it was incorporated. They're like, "What date would you like?" Right? and we wanted a lucky day actually for the client, and we picked it, and there was no KYC requirements, nothing. 3 forms, and it was done instantly. Now obviously that is changing because they have the new beneficial ownership register coming in the US, haven't they, from next year? But that is going to be a I think, what's the technical word, a shit show. I think that is going to be
for a lot of companies.
For a lot of companies, and obviously there's thousands and thousands. I was at a presentation in New York, and it was a great guy from Bank of America was talking about this new register coming out in America, and he had some numbers up, which actually I should share. Maybe I'll put it up on the screen when I do the video. But it was like millions and millions and millions of documents, and millions and millions and millions of lawyer hours to come up with beneficial owner registers for every single US company that's ever been incorporated. So, but yeah, what's your view in America? I know you do a bit in Miami, don't you?
Yeah, we do operate in Wyoming, and Wyoming and Delaware is the ongoing battle of the East versus the West, basically. But they're very similar in terms of rules and process. It's a funny one. It's a really funny one, because you have on one side, obviously, what we're talking about, like the BOs, the private register of directors, like this and that, and you go to the US and you have no information about the directors, no information about the shareholders, no information about the directors, the beneficial owners. We do KYC, so at least like we keep that, but it's so common that we have people coming to us and be like, oh, I had a company in New Mexico and they didn't ask me even my name and so on. There is this saying that like the real offshore of the world is the US. Like if you truly want to be anonymous, an LLC in Wyoming, a C Corp in Delaware, like it's unbeatable. Nobody's gonna look there. No country ever is gonna try to bully the US, because obviously it's impossible for that. And the US, at least, like what they truly understand is that capitalism is good for the economy, and they're really trying to push on that narrative a lot. So they want to put you in a position of like the easiest possible way of running a business. I'll give you an example, because obviously, like once we move into Europe, that's a very good connection. To close down a company in Malta, this happened to me personally. I had a dormant entity in Malta, no bank account, no nothing, no movements. I just opened that for an experiment, and then that's it. I just shut it down. Not a single transaction, nothing at all. No bank account, dormant. The accountant charged me 2,400 euro to close down the company, and I was not allowed. And on top of that, I had like another 1,000 plus from the law firms to submit the closing down process to the register. So in total, plus or minus, I spent 4,000 euro to close down a company, a dormant company, never used. 4,000 euro. In Wyoming, if you don't pay your renewal fees, after 30 days, the company is dissolved automatically. So it's 4,000 versus 0.
Is that struck off, or is that dissolved?
So no, it gets, so at the beginning it gets freeze, like it gets like a block, and then you have like an additional 2 months to try and like bring them back. If you don't do that, then it's fully strike off. Then it will completely gone.
Yeah.
It's just like they get it. They understand it. It's like, oh, you want to try and have a business? I'm going to put you in a condition that is so easy to do that. Again, another comparison, creating a company in Wyoming, the government fees are around $102 in fees from the government side. You create a BVI company with more than 50,000 shares, for example, now you're looking at $1,300 in government fees. Not what the agent charged you, but like the actual cost of the government, like the taxes that you're paying to create a company. It's 13 times more expensive to create the company in BVI than in Wyoming. They just understand that if you have a business idea, you should be put in a position of just like go and try it out. And if it works, then we talk about it later on, because that's the downside to me, at least of the US. You have the state structure where you need to pay taxes in every state where your clients are located, and that's a little bit tricky and complicated. But then you have the IRS. And as you were mentioning about like Cayman, for example, that everything is automated, you know, if I'm missing a deadline in BVI or in Panama or in any country in general, I'm kind of relaxed in reality. Even in Singapore, for example, that is very strict on a lot of things, they do let you go if, you know, they just give you a fine and that's about it. But messing out with the IRS or making a mistake with the IRS is something that I'm like, maybe not. That's something that I will be fairly scared of.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's obviously the problem with the US, isn't it? Is the corporate framework's excellent. You can get access to the banking system.
Yeah.
I agree. It is. Do you want to hide anything? You hide it there. It's out non in CRS, and it's very easy to operate there. But of course, you are on the IRS radar. You normally have to get an EIN number, don't you? It's pretty hard not to have to get an EIN number from the IRS to open a bank account or something. So you're going to put yourself on the radar. I believe, and I'm investigating this right now actually, but I do believe you can set up a Delaware LLC as long as it's a sole member one. If there's no US persons and no US source income, then it is completely outside the scope of US tax, because actually effectively it's almost a sole trader actually.
That is
So
true.
in that scenario, you could use the US corporate framework without getting into the tax net, but I think that's the only way to do it. Yeah, have you seen that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. One thing on that I didn't know the first time, like when I started in the industry and everything, is that on that specific model, you as the owner of the company, if you're outside of the US, have 3 months to file a form to actually tell that to the IRS. If you don't file the form, you are actually liable for missing that, and you're going to get a penalty eventually. So that's one of the things of like that I think is a good point of the US, is that you need to know what you're doing there. It's one of those locations where like you're kind of like, the good and the bad is that you're left on your own. So because the rules are like very relaxed on a lot of things, they do expect you to be aware of what you need to do. And if you don't do that, then the penalties are pretty severe in that sense. So if it's your first jurisdiction, like you're never done like companies outside or things like that, maybe I would not recommend the US in general, because your agent is not really going to help you a lot in that sense. You need to know what you're doing. So I would say that it's one of those countries that, yes, super good for privacy, super good to fly under the radar, become invisible, and so on. But it's for experienced people. If you've never done that, then forget about it. It's because you're gonna have like some problems. Otherwise, we go obviously in the classic model, like you want to start an FBA, you want to start an e-commerce, you want to sell in the US, you want to sell on Amazon, whatever things, then yes, it's a perfect option. There are an insane amount of service provider like Atlas and you name it and so on. AngelList also allows you to create companies now and all that stuff. So for the more relaxed air bracket type of business models, that's fairly easy peasy. But obviously we deal with other type of situations, and so for that I would say a little bit more experience from the client side is probably required.
Yeah, I think that's a great point actually. Exactly, it's not for the uninitiated, is it, America? Because it is too easy to make a mistake, which is costly. Okay, well, let's move on to Europe. So I think really in Europe, the way I lump it is kind of Malta, Gibraltar, maybe you put Cyprus in that same bracket, and I kind of almost see those more as EU tax treaty plays, and then of course Switzerland and Luxembourg. I mean, my view is Switzerland's actually like the ultimate holding company, but it has this 35% withholding tax on dividends that you can only claim back if you're a resident. So that kind of kills using the Swiss companies. Luxembourg obviously is great for headquartering if you're doing business in Europe. You have the tax treaties between most of the big European countries. Luxembourg was obviously quite sheltered politically, so it doesn't get whacked over the head so much. But what I've seen with Luxembourg is a bit like you were saying before. Actually, it's the accounting. The accounting fees that you don't think about when you're looking at a fee schedule, the bookkeeping and accounting on any of the entities there can push you well over 10 grand. So I think Luxembourg's only a bit like Cayman, actually, only if you're dealing with big money, big assets, or and you do have to put proper substance there, which is going to cost you. I really Malta and Gibraltar, I know they were pretty gung-ho in the ICO boom, weren't they? And they got perhaps a little bit tainted with the bad money that was flowing there in 2017-18. I do see clients using those jurisdictions where they might want to sort of move dividends around, and if they live in Portugal, for example, they can perhaps take a dividend from an EU country, so they can take a dividend from a Maltese or Cypriot company, and that works well. So I think those those jurisdictions work well there. I know FINMA recently here in Switzerland rejected a Gibraltar company buying a bank here. So, I'm not sure how those jurisdictions are sort of seen potentially here in Europe, even though they're in the EU. Malta's the craziest place on the planet.
Yes, yes,
Isn't
it is.
It's just a big melting pot of Libyan, Italian, everybody else, Swedish gambling companies, British expats. Everybody's there. So I think these places kind of actually have quite good economies because they have gambling laws. They have a lot of gambling companies there, crypto things going on, private wealth stuff going on. So they kind of do okay, but I don't really recommend them as much as other places. But what's your view?
I totally agree with you. So I think that Switzerland to me is kind of like an easy one because it's kind of like, by living in Singapore is one of those, is either Singapore or Switzerland. It's like the best brand that you can get in the world in terms of like stability, reputation, protection, and all of that stuff. The thing that we tell clients about Switzerland is like, you need a physical person in the country. If you don't have anybody in the territory, forget about it. It's not going to work. Because of the cost, because of the taxes, but even like because of the day-to-day operation of dealing with the banks, dealing with the governments, all of that stuff. You need someone in the territory in general. But if you do have that person, then, and you do have the budget also, because obviously we're playing on categories that are completely different than, we moved from like $102 of Wyoming to Switzerland. Like we're in a completely different realm here. But if you do have the money, you want to have like literally the ultimate brand, and you can afford that person, or you do have someone that is there, then yes, go for it. It's a perfect place. Completely different opinion, unfortunately, on the other Europeans, because I've done 2 years of work with Malta, and we stopped offering that as a jurisdiction because of like all of these headaches that comes in place every single time and so on. Jokes aside, I do agree with you that it's a beautiful place. If you're looking for that country where you want to meet up with your accountant, you want to like go every year, like for a couple of weeks to sort out your things, you're a little bit more old school than so on, then yeah, Malta is perfect. It's a beautiful place for all this. It's a party town, like tons of things to do and everything. But in terms of like corporate structures and so on, yes, if I'm a European living in Europe, I could create a European company, so I could take advantage of like some of the taxes. I agree with you on that. But at that point, I would almost put it on the table of, for example, having an offshore company, not in a blacklisted country, because that will complicate things. But so, for example, let's take Seychelles, which is not there. I would still need to declare everything. So now, whatever operations happens, I end up having to pay my corporate taxes in Europe because obviously I don't have economical substance in Seychelles. But because of the easiness of running a company there, and so I don't need to deal with like the VAT. I don't need to deal with the extra expenses, costs, and all of that stuff. I don't need to go through all of that like bureaucracy. I'm almost tempted to say that it's actually going to be easier to manage an offshore company from Europe than an actual European company in another country.
Mm.
It's one of those things. I'm Italian, so I'm super European, everything. But it's one of the stories that, like, I am really, really sad of the direction that, like, the jurisdiction structure, the corporate governance in Europe is taken. We've seen some sort of like ideas from like, going back on the ICO side from Estonia, for example, with the e-residency and so on. That's just the marketing terms. Because you still need a sponsor, you still need a director on your company. You're still not allowed to do crypto activities anymore because they block all the licenses. If you're running an exchange that you got kicked out from there. I don't know. I think that they really lost the compass. If I'm a European and I'm there, I'm almost probably going to set up a company in London. Or if I want to still look at the offshore, I'm probably going to look at Jersey or Isle of Man. Like I'm still going to like have the line outside of the European market somehow, because the bureaucracy is just insane. It's so much money for so much work that is not by default like that. It doesn't require it so much.
Okay, yeah, perhaps the service providers got a bit greedy on these islands, right? Okay, so yeah, but perhaps we'll just maybe talk about the Crown dependencies, Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, and maybe London. Then we can do the Seychelles, Asia, and then wrap up on the Pacific. So I think we're nearly there, aren't we? So I think yeah, I mean Jersey and Guernsey, I think have just gone completely mad. I mean, it seems like the government bureaucracy really on these islands is expanding so much, and I know it's not just the finance industry that people complain about, but the governments on these islands, especially Jersey, are just so big and powerful. The rules in Jersey and Guernsey are insane around AML and compliance, just madness. There was a case called Rahman. It was a JP Morgan trust client, and JP Morgan in Jersey, and they lost the case, and it was the whole thing around sham trusts. And ever since then, frankly, I think and this was in like '96 or something like that, the whole industry's just been completely scared of everything. And yeah, I mean, I was in Toronto the other week, and all the lawyers that were saying they wouldn't touch Jersey or Guernsey because they're like, we don't mind. Our clients want to be transparent. They don't mind handing documents over, but they don't want to be audited every year, and is the way that they put it. Yeah, I think you can see that on the ground, that really Jersey and Guernsey sort of sacrificed their private wealth business. They've sort of strangled it with their compliance rules. I mean, maybe they had to. I mean, certainly they're never on any blacklists and that. So, I mean, to be fair to them, that they knew quite early on that they needed to be whitelisted and not on any blacklist, which they achieved. But really, they've sort of become more of a funds jurisdiction, actually. So I'm not a huge fan on those islands, because I just know that as soon as you start dealing with service providers there, you are going to have a nightmare in terms of admin and fees, a bit like what you were saying with Malta and Gibraltar. Now, the UK is always interesting, actually, because actually quite often, as you said, a UK company really works really well.
Yeah, it's very true.
There's no tax on dividends out and things like that, right? And you know, you don't have to have a local director. Actually, the filing requirements are quite straightforward, and everything's online. They're cheap and easy to set up and run. I mean, even the corporation tax isn't too bad in some ways. So, yeah. So, what's your view on the Crown dependencies and the UK?
I think that I do agree with you on the entire structure. I'm still a fan of the purposeless trust in Jersey. I still think that one is a very good experiment of R&D, that if you play that properly, you could almost achieve the foundation or the trust in Cayman, the private foundation in Panama. Like it's one of those like few points that almost achieve like the perfection of the asset protection if structured in a proper way. But I do agree. I would not set up a startup there. I would not set up a company or anything like that, because at that point, yes, it's very true. The requirements are insane. But for asset protection, if I'm, for example, a European, the proximity gives that plus. While, for example, you know, Panama is going to take you 11 hours, 12 hours to be reached. Jersey, you're literally there in a couple of hours. So somehow the proximity in terms of like asset protection, when you're dealing with like substantial amounts and everything, it does that plus. While on London is, I mean, I think is the same as like an LSC in Wyoming. Like London to me is the US of Europe. Is a pity, obviously, for Europeans when Brexit happened, because it was a very, very good option for startups, for business ideas. You had to test out an MVP. You wanted to develop something. It was like the most cost-efficient way to do that. They remain obviously on all of that. So that's a massive plus. Obviously, because of Brexit now, you know that you need to deal with the additional accounting requirements in the country where you are, if you're a European. If you're outside, obviously, if you're in America, no, you're still going to look at Delaware and Wyoming. But if you're outside, like, for example, Asia or Africa and so on, it's a jurisdiction to look at. It's super easy to do business. It's fairly very, very cheap to operate. The system is like pure Commonwealth law. So, I mean, the most used law that there is around the world. So a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants are going to be used to the rules already. It's a good place. It's really that place that when I was in Italy, when I was doing startup back in the days and I was in my 20s, that was the place to start a company, because you would have really set it up in 30 minutes online without the need of help of anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think UK is always worth looking at. We should say it's England and Wales, really, not Scotland, isn't it? But
Fair enough.
Yeah. Quite often it ticks all the boxes. Okay, well, let's talk really quickly about maybe Seychelles and Mauritius, and then we'll dive into Asia. I know you've done a lot in Seychelles. Mauritius, my view, of course, that was always sort of African tax treaty play, perhaps an Indian tax treaty play. I know a lot of people have used it as a sort of low-cost admin jurisdiction. I would probably only use it if it had the African tax treaty play. Perhaps you're dealing with something in South Africa, for example. So you're trying to get money out of Africa up to another corporate headquarters that is somewhere else. It would work. I probably wouldn't use it for private wealth unless maybe it was an Indian connection. Seychelles, it always comes up when I'm talking to people. I think there's perhaps still some negative sort of feeling around Seychelles at the minute after a few blow-ups the last few years. There's some legendary trust case law has come out of Seychelles, not in a good way, like tax case laws. But yeah, what's your view on Mauritius and Seychelles?
So they're the cousins, basically. The Mauritius is the more experienced one. So the service providers are more organized and so on. Seychelles is the little cousin that has been emerging in the past few years and so on. We have done a lot of work with Seychelles, it's very true. Like, we work with the government there and so on. It's a sad story to me. Like, it's a sad case because they were really, really good, but due to the blacklisted thing, they've really changed a lot of stuff. It's one of the stories like very similar to Belize. They have a very nice thing and they kind of like tossed it away a little bit. Even the accounting requirements itself, the fact that you have like to file your books twice in June and in December, it's like, why? Just every country in the world asks you to do that once. Why do you need to show that you're so committed to like make the European Union happy and so on? Like, sure, of course you need to do that because you need to get out of blacklisted, but just do once. Like, don't overdo. Make life easier to the people. Same thing for the crypto scene. Like in 2017 and 2018, it was a massive crypto hub for ICOs and so on. Then they had this idea of potentially having a sandbox. Then with the blacklisted thing, they completely scrapped the sandbox entirely. They start having issues around crypto and so on. Now there is the rumor that the VASP should be approved, but it was supposed to be approved already in August. So that's another example of them not being fully organized on things because they keep postponing stuff. But say if you're having a Web3 project, you're on hold. You can't incorporate because they're waiting for the rules. And the agents, us as service provider, we're not allowed to pass the request to create the company because the rules are still pending. So I do agree with you. If you are looking at the two countries as an African play, it makes total sense. In the same way that in a LATAM game, you will go for Panama, in the same way that for North American, you will look at Cayman. Like every continent has those countries that are playing in that way. Between the two, if I'm doing an African play, I would actually go for Mauritius, to be honest, because they have more experience. They understand the game a little bit better. But, and this is probably because of the history that I have with the country and so on, if I'm thinking about like a private holding, so just a company for myself, advisory, consulting, freelancing, those type of things, I would actually still pick Seychelles on that matter. Mostly because if I'm looking at that type of thing, not the asset protection side, because obviously I don't want to have the accounting for asset protection and stuff like that. But if I'm doing a freelancing company for myself, for example, I'm required as a business owner to have a clear view of my cash flow. And so now those 2 accounting requirements or 2 filings per year becomes less of a pain, but more of a routine, because I would have to do that either way. So I still keep that use case in place. For a one-man show, I still think is a very, very good jurisdiction. But for teams, for companies, for startups, for Web3 projects, for anything else, I think that they really, really have done a lot of damage on their own structure.
Okay. Let's talk about Asia then. So I think let's do Singapore, Hong Kong, and then we'll finish with a quick chat on the Cook Islands and Marshall Islands. So, but my view is, I mean, Singapore's fantastic. I think company set up very easy to do and run. My only issue with Singapore is this need to have that local director there, and actually more so for the poor local director, because if you don't file your accounts and things on time, they actually get dragged to court, don't they? It's actually very serious. So I think Singapore companies aren't a joke. They're not really offshore companies. They're a bit more like what you might call mid-shore, really, a bit like New Zealand as well. Not like a fully onshore, offshore jurisdiction, but somewhere in the middle. Hong Kong companies obviously fantastic as well. Singapore and Hong Kong with the territorial tax regimes. So I think they're both great companies. And probably I would steer people a little bit away from Hong Kong, just because we don't really know kind of what's going on with China there. It seems to be all relaxed at the minute. Anybody doing anything in Asia and Australia should have a Singapore company. You can access the banking system, which is great. So what's your views on those jurisdictions?
I mean, by living in Singapore, having a filing agent here, clearly, like, Singapore to me is it's super stable, it's super secure for asset protection, IP protections, anything that relates to protection is probably one of the best countries in the world. You have some of the most stable banks in the world. The currency is fairly stable also to basically any other currency in the world. It's pretty strong. The government is really, really aware of how to keep the country in the map, and they have the strongest passport. So the relationship with other countries is massive. It's really, really good on a lot of levels. It's a pure Commonwealth system. So even like when you're drafting contracts and so on, it's easy. It's easy to do business. It's fast. It's quick. It's very, very efficient on a lot of levels. I do totally agree with you on the sense that it's like I wouldn't classify that as pure offshore, because you do have a 17% taxation, corporate taxes. You do have so again, and that's like them playing the game in a very smart way, because of like the global corporate tax system that is like around the 20%, there is 17, so they're as close as possible to not end up into the blacklisted. However, what they've done is that they give you like some incentives and benefits on the first 3 years. They give you a 75% discount on the first $100,000 profit, and from the 4th year ongoing, they give you a 50% discount on the first 200. So again, if you're doing a startup, it's a perfect place because it doesn't achieve the 0% of the offshore, but you are in a country that is like super high reputation, and you're still ending up like as a startup with like, you know, the 4, 5, 6% taxes, which is super, super low. One thing that I want to say is that the territorial tax system, that's a very, very difficult one to achieve. And in theory, it's perfect. You know, you have a company in Singapore. If you have assets that are generated and income that is generated outside, you don't have to pay anything. But however, it's very difficult to achieve because, for example, if you have a company that has a bank account in Singapore, and those money goes into the Singaporean bank account, even if the client is outside, your operation is outside and so on, now those money are in Singapore, you need to pay taxes on that. So creating that structure requires, again, a little bit of attention. So you need to have an agent, in this case, a filing agent that knows what he's doing. You need someone with experience in that field, not the random person that set up a company and so on, because otherwise you're going to have issues and so on. But Singapore, obviously, like it's a perfect place for startups, for Americans companies that wants to expand into Asia, for Europeans companies, every company that wants to expand into APAC and Asia in general. Or even startups in APAC directly, they all come to Singapore because of the security level. The local director part, and you're completely correct on that. It's there for the government actually to intimidate it, not vice versa. A lot of clients think that the local director has control over the company and so on. That's not really the case. If you don't pay your bills, if you don't pay your taxes, you don't pay your stuff, it's actually the local director that is accountable for that. And that's the reason why in a lot of cases that cost, for example, when you're thinking about like the cost of incorporating a company, the local directorship is almost 50% of that bill. But it's because of the actual liabilities that comes with that. There is an actual risk for that side. Hong Kong, completely different story, because Hong Kong was the country that incorporated the highest numbers of companies in the world. So everybody wants to have a company in Hong Kong. Since they returned to China, there are a lot of Hong Kong companies that are coming to Singapore. I would say if your interest is the Chinese market, do a company in Hong Kong. If you are someone living in Hong Kong, do a company in Hong Kong. If you're planning on moving and live to Hong Kong, do a company there. That's it. I wouldn't it's too risky. Look at even what is happening with the Web3 options. And now they're becoming like super pro Web3 again. They were pro Web3 in the 2017. Then they became against. Then they reopened in 2020. Then they didn't again against. Now they're reopening. If you're running a company, you're literally obliged to closing and opening that every 2 to 3 years. You can't run a business in a proper way in that way. So I'm a little bit not so much.
No, I completely agree. I totally agree. And if there's one thing that business people don't like, it's uncertainty, right? And if you can't provide that, then it's best to stay clear. Okay, well, before we'll finish on the Pacific, but we missed one important area, which of course is the UAE.
Oh, fair enough. That's
obviously people like Russell Cayman companies and all the free zone companies. I mean, I think it's fairly straightforward to say, you know, if you're doing business in the UAE, that's the place to do it. But perhaps I wouldn't use UAE companies otherwise, mainly because even with the free zones, perhaps you're tipping into Arabic legal systems, but also just from a practical perspective, the filing requirements and things there are insane. You've heard stories of people spending $10,000 just to get documents notarized, and takes a long time. So I think the UAE is pretty straightforward, isn't it? I wouldn't touch it unless you're kind of there, living there, or doing business there.
I do agree. I think that the play for a UAE entity is the fact that because of that 0% on capital gain, when you do potentially coming in of a fair amount of money, let's say that you have a company offshore, you park the money there so you don't pay the taxes and so on, you still are not allowed to touch those money, because if you bring them back, then now you need to pay the taxes. So a lot of people, what they do is that they will relocate to a country where they get 0% capital gain and they can take 100% of those money. 99% of those countries are very, very difficult to achieve. Singapore, for example, is a perfect example of that. It's very, very difficult to get a visa there. The UAE has that agreement with the company plus the 12-month visa, which is a perfect match in that sense. Apart from that, obviously, if you're dealing with the Middle East as a market, absolutely yes. The geographical point is always very important. But apart from that, I do agree. You do have the very famous the local companies, which you need to have the sponsor. I'm way more afraid of a local sponsor than the local director side. For example, the companies like Singapore, because the stories are if the local sponsors decide to retain control of your company, or decide that all of a sudden your book sees that your company is making millions, so wants to get some extra money for their service, you don't have any power over there, because you got that local sponsor that ultimately has the control of your business. So if they go crazy, you're kind of screwed. The other side is the free zone. But the problem that I have with the free zone is that basically they're seen as blacklisted from everywhere. No bank touched transactions from the free zone in the UAE. No government is allowed in that. They treat you specifically as you're blacklisted. So at that point, if I'm blacklisted for blacklisted, I will pick totally another jurisdiction, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And I've heard of people moving from here in Switzerland to Dubai and then being asked by the Swiss banks to close their mortgages down and things like that, right? because they're resident there, and some banks won't accept money from a UAE bank or UAE company. So yeah, you do have to be a bit careful there. Okay, well, let's we're nearly there. Let's finish with easy one. I think the Pacific, isn't it? I mean, the Cook Islands is really just a asset protection trust jurisdiction. I think I don't see why you'd have a Cook Islands company, or we could even talk about Samoa in this sort of bracket as well. I think Samoa had some plays that Australians were doing back in the day that don't work now, to do with like the pension funds there. Cook Islands, yeah, you might have a Cook Islands company. I think if you were doing a Cook Islands trust and that was you were using the asset protection laws, which I will do a video one day about asset protection jurisdictions. But then maybe the only one worth of note in the Pacific is, of course, the Marshall Islands, which is almost kind of part of America in a weird way, isn't it? And is like is it the premier, would you say, shipping registration jurisdiction, isn't it? So
yeah,
the Marshall Islands seem to kind of be a bit more protected. I think I saw a photo of Anthony Blinken there relatively recently. So they're obviously under a little bit protection of America, and not a bad. To be honest, actually, it's not a bad option. Like a BVI, I would say, using it in that sense. I know we've spoken about how it probably doesn't work for crypto so well anymore, does it? Because they went gung ho and then freaked out.
That's very true.
I tried to set a DAO up there recently, and it got all very strange with an agent. We had to use a qualified agent, and it all got very expensive very quickly. But yeah, what's your view on the Pacific?
I think that like one that we didn't mention will be Curacao. That I would throw in as well. I would say that the Cook to me has kind of like, again, very similar to like Bahamas versus Cayman. They kind of lost that asset protection status versus Singapore. A lot of Australians, a lot of like Kiwi tend to like go more into the Singaporean side because of like the stability, the size, the reputation, and so on. But and the other thing is, like, even if I'm looking like, for example, the Australian, it's very, very common for them to nowadays having their own trust in the country directly rather than going offshore. So they lost a little bit of advantage of what they used to be in the past. I would still consider them if you're trying to be a little bit like private on the matter, because obviously, like Singapore, for example, everything is public. So if you're in that like part of the world, you want to go like a little bit under the radar, you want to like maybe accumulate money for future generations and those type of things, then I can still see a play there as well. However, nowadays with those type of plays, I would probably look at like even Cayman directly, or again, I would try to have a structure where maybe I would have a Singaporean trust that is with a BVI model or something like that. I would try to like shuffle things up a little bit in a different way. Marshall, Marshall, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with that, because yes, it's basically like US territory, and so we got an insane amount of clients from the US that are like Marshall Islands, straight to the point. And in particular, like with DAOs, because of their DAO LLC model and so on. And I don't think it's superior than what you get from a foundation in Panama. And that, unfortunately, is a conversation that with a lot of Americans I lost completely a lot of times, because they simply don't care. They like Marshall and they want to have Marshall and so on. But so to give you an idea on like the DAO LLC, it's a non-profit company, which already to me is a problem, because if you are an entity that has a treasury, you want to accumulate that and so on, like many companies are doing now, where they have their treasury, they put that into a yield generating system, they start earning those money and so on. Because you're in a non-profit, you can't retain those money, you can't accumulate the treasury, you always need to spend it and so on, which is not good for a DAO. And one of the comments that I get all the time is that, yeah, but you can also decide to be for profit if you pay your 3% or 3.5% taxes. And I'm like, but why would you want to pay that when a foundation in Panama allows you to be for profit and pay 0%? Like, again, to me, that's not a fair argument. Then you get the fact that if you're doing a DAO and you own more than 25%, you need to do the KYC, which again, Panama has zero KYC on any member. It doesn't matter on that side. So I don't see that the love or that appeal for the DAO LLC from Marshall. The biggest concern that I have on Marshall is that I don't trust the country. Marshall used to be super pro crypto back in 2017. A lot of companies were incorporating there that were doing ICO and so on. And then literally in 24 hours, they flipped and they were like, no more. Every person that had a company there was basically either shut down or required to go somewhere else. Now they're back. Now they're like, oh, DAO LLC, we're back, which is the same thing that they've done with an ICO. There is nothing, not a single proof that shows that the first time that they're going to get a tiny little bit of pressure on the matter, they're not going to close everything like they did before. And
as you say, they're US territory, right? Where
correct, and that's the thing.
There's a turf war going on. Yeah, I agree. I think there's this uncertainty, right, which is not good for business.
Yeah, no, I can't recommend. I know it's a super popular jurisdiction that they really, really love that. A lot of people enjoy Marshall so much. On that one, unfortunately, I'm on the opposite side because I've seen what happens when a government change laws, and I know how many headaches a company goes through. Imagine that you have a DAO that has maybe like 5,000 members, and you need to relocate that entire structure to another jurisdiction. Like it's insane, but people don't think about this stuff. Unfortunately, they're just like, "Oh, my friend told me Marshall, and that's it. We're gonna."
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, people just do what their friends said. I mean, what I've been doing more with the DAOs is almost not worrying about the DAO, but then creating an entity it's sort of real life representative, more in the real world.
Yeah.
So and you can use any of the structures we've spoke about. So you're not trying to make the DAO a legal entity, but it has a representative that it can fund, and then that can do all the legal world stuff. So opening bank account, fiat, renting an office, hiring employees. Because some of these DAO laws are a little bit fresh, aren't they?
Oh, super.
Bahamas is thinking about bringing one out. I think they've got it in draft actually. Yeah, so you say Cayman's quite established, bit more established on that. So, okay. Any other? What have we missed? Have we covered everything there? Do you think? I think that was pretty comprehensive, isn't it?
Well, finishing with Curacao, very similar comment on the UAE. You have the local sponsor thing, which is always the tricky one, but very, very, very famous jurisdiction for gambling because
And there was a Dutch. That was when you had the Dutch service providers sort of ruling the world a bit, wasn't it? Always had a very good reputation because Dutch actually run things very well. And I know lots of people who work for Dutch companies, but most of those Dutch-owned offshore companies, I think, have disappeared now. But they were all using Curacao, weren't they? So
yes,
I don't see. I see legacy stuff there. I don't see anything new.
That is true. I do agree. They try and do something with the Web3. They're trying to they're one of those places that it's still strong for the gambling side. They're still like surviving in that sense. But for everything else, they're following that process of like slowly become less and less famous. Eventually, yes, they're probably like gonna remain only for one single use case, which most likely will be the gambling part, and completely disappear from the map for everything else.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Stefano, thank you so much. That was an awesome conversation. I think I'll chop that up into chapters for the audience.
Fair enough.
Or even some YouTube shorts, right, per jurisdiction. But we probably should do this again in 6 months' time, something, when it all change. But thank you so much. That was really comprehensive.
My pleasure, and thanks to you. We literally went across the entire globe, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks for watching the video. I've put the details up here of myself. Get in touch if you have any questions. Put Stefano at Corporatio's details here. If you have any questions about offshore companies and you want to talk further, here are the links on how to get in touch with us. Thanks so much for watching this video. Have a great day.